Hey, I'm so happy you joined me here. We're about to head into the Pena Peck House and meet Cheryl. Now, Cheryl here is a part of the Women's Exchange. They are doing profound things in this town. They're bringing history back to life. They're bringing new visions to what history could have looked like back then. Let's find out the very special item that they have here at the Pena Peck House. And let's learn a bit more about history. Let's go this way. So, here we are with Cheryl at the Pena Peck House, and she's going to be telling us about that very special project here today.
Hi, welcome. It's good to have you. We had a project that came up. One of our members saw an article in the New York Times, and we saw this beautiful dress, and we thought, wow, it'd be great if we could get it to St. Augustine. So Jay Wiseman called Lana Turner, who was the woman who instituted this whole thing, and they said, oh, sure, we'd love to come down. So in February of 2023, Lana and Cassandra Bloomfield, who was the designer and creator of this dress, came to St. Augustine, and we did a whole week on Anna Murray Douglass. Now you wonder who Anna Murray Douglass is. She was Frederick Douglass's first wife. And Frederick Douglass was a renowned abolitionist prior to the Civil War and after the Civil War. You might call him the rock star of the 1800s. Anna was his first wife, amazing woman, very quiet, stood in the background, probably the perfect example of the woman behind the man. She was a daughter of a slave who had been freed just before she was born. So when she was born, she became a free black. She was a seamstress. She met Frederick. She had saved her money because she worked as a housekeeper for a family in Baltimore. So she took her saved money and bought papers, false papers for him, so he could escape to freedom because he was a slave at that time. He went to New York City and he wrote him and said, everything's good, I'm here. And so she went and joined them, and in September of 1848, they were married in New York City. Well, a new book about Frederick Douglass came out, which won the Pulitzer Prize, and Lana Turner decided she wanted to do something special because she's had the Literary Guild. So they had a wedding reception, and she said, well, you can't have a wedding without a wedding dress. So she commissioned Cassandra to make the dress. That instilled us here at the Women's Exchange to do some research about Anna Murray Douglass, which there is not a lot about women in the 1800s. But we did find out, just as Cassandra did, that she wore a plum silk dress. So Cassandra created this plum silk dress. We did some research on the Underground Railroad, which was not a railroad, by the way. It was a series of houses that slaves stopped at on their road to freedom. And we also did some study on abolitionists.
And what was her part in the Underground Railroad?
Now, we found out that Anna Murray Douglass, besides getting Frederick out of slavery, she was an abolitionist. She did not know how to read or write. She was illiterate, and her husband was probably one of the most illiterate men in the world. But if you look at her life, she raised 4 children. She ran the household. She worked in a shoe factory to support the family while he was running around doing the speeches. She made sure he always looked his best. So who had time to learn to read? But she made sure her children were educated and taught them how to run a printing press. So this is an amazing woman. And so we thought we should hear about her because there's a lot of women in history like that.
Correct. A lot of women here in St. Augustine as well. Now, she never made it down here to St. Augustine, but Frederick Douglass did. Why did she choose not to come to
She had passed away at that point, but she did not travel with him. She was very uncomfortable in certain areas. She sewed him the sailor's outfit. She was a very accomplished seamstress. If you notice on her hem, her name is embroidered in, and she would embroider her initials in anything she made. Cassandra had wanted to embroider all around the hem, all the things she did, and one of them was seamstress, and that's partially how she made a living. So she made him the sailor suit. And she was a very frugal woman, by the way. She used some of her savings, and then she bought him the papers so that he could pose as a sailor with the proper papers. Because then they didn't have photography. There was no picture on your ID in those days.
The difference of the times.
When they lived in New England, there was a lot of fear that he would be taken back into slavery, and because she had helped him, she could be prosecuted. So she had a lot of fear about that. She didn't know anyone. Her family was down in Maryland. She really didn't want to travel. At one point, he was tempted to stay in England because there were so many people after him. And she said, I'm not leaving. And they moved to upstate New York, and she raised her family there. She just didn't want to be in the spotlight, to tell you the truth. I think she was just so busy trying to keep everything going that she just thought, I don't need to be the star. I've got one in the family.
Little did she know, years and years and years later, we'd be talking about her and showing her beautiful wedding dress that was specifically designed for her, right?
Right.
And not only that, but it was all handmade too, wasn't it?
Her original dress was lost in a fire. So Cassandra created this off of what she thought she would wear. Now, you remember that Anna Marie Douglass was a housekeeper, so she was lower middle class, a servant. So this might have been a little outside of pay scale, but if I was Anna Marie Douglass and saw that dress, I would really like to wear it and own it. Cassandra did a beautiful job, and then that's a prime example of how history can inspire us to create things, from history. And Cassandra went to the Metropolitan Museum, went online, researched dresses of that period, and came up with this design. All we knew that was on silk. You have to realize in the 1800s, most people wore their best dress for their wedding, and they kept that dress for years for their best occasions. In our research, we found some pictures of her, and I have a feeling the dress she was wearing, I have no historical documentation to verify this, but if you use your reason, you can figure out a lot of things. And I think this might have been a wedding dress. If it had survived the fire, it would have probably been passed on to her children, because clothes were passed on, because when they were handmade, it took forever. Cassandra used modern machinery to make this dress, but she designed it in the same way. She found the pictures, she made she came up with the design, she made the patterns, she even made underwear. There's a corset under there and the lingerie. That's what went on. You went to a dressmaker and worked with them, and it took weeks. And so that's why people held on to it. And usually only their better clothes survived to this day, because their workday clothes they wore for years and years and years. If fashion changed, you would see on the street people in things that were in fashion 20, 30 years ago. So it's very different than today. Very different.
Well, I know with me and the outfits that I wear, I don't even wear it all day, but they slept in them back then too, right?
Yeah, usually their chemise or their undergarment was one long, like a nightgown. People who had money didn't do this, but working class people did. When they got up in the morning, they would throw a skirt on over it. If it was cold out, they would add a little jacket or a corselet or a corset that was laced. Sometimes the sleeves were detachable, so that if it was warm, maybe it was 40 in the morning and 80 in the afternoon, they would unbutton the sleeves and they would be more comfortable. You have to remember, people didn't wash like we do today, and it was very labor intense to wash your clothes. People wore their clothes a lot. That's why you see in dresses like this, usually there were two pieces. Even people who had money, they would wear the skirt, but they would change the blouse for dinner or the top for dinner. And as the years went on, maybe next year, you wanted to have your dress look like it was brand new. Well, they would add trim and lace or a shawl. They would do things like that to try to stay in fashion. Now, of course, the silhouettes changed with age, but you didn't own a lot of clothes, so you had to make them last. Even poor people who made their own clothes took pride in their work and took care of it, because there were basically 4 fibers in those days. There was flax, which is linen, by the way, wool, cotton, and silk. Sometimes it was woven or what. And that was a big industry. Probably 3 million people in England were just spinning and creating thread. And then they came out with the spinning jenny, and it was done mechanically. The word spinster comes from the word spinning, because when they were not allowed to weave, they were allowed to spin. They felt the weaving was too intricate and their little minds couldn't handle it. Times have changed a lot.
Times have changed, but how the women have impacted this town and our history of this town, I would say probably hasn't changed, because I would lump you and the other women who have done all of the studying on this dress into that grouping, with holding on to the history, trying to bring the history alive for us today and what it might have looked like back in the day.
I have to say that we at the Women's Exchange really cherish history. We have been here 130 years in this city, and we've been in the Pena Peck House for 90s. I would say that we cherish history and we like to take care of it. We'll be here for History Days And then the dress is going back up to New York, and Lanam is planning something spectacular for their wedding anniversary next year. And then she's finding a home for it. But do come and visit the house. Our docents are very good at guiding people around. The house gives a really great example of how people lived in the 1800s.
Well, Cheryl, it's been such a pleasure getting to know you, meeting this beautiful, gorgeous dress. The women are here, and they're just so knowledgeable of the location. It's absolutely free to come here, and you can truly see the love and the passion for this town. And I'm so happy to be a part of it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Come and visit again.
We will for sure.